Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 10 State and Civil Society with topic Concept of Civil Society and Overview. The concept of civil society is associated with the Western intellectual tradition. With the epochal changes in the West, the idea of civil society has grown progressively. Many factors have gone into developing the concept of the state as it has come to stay with us. These factors, to mention a few, include the emergence of secular authority, the development of the institution of property, the decline of the absolutist state, the growth of urban culture, the rise of nationalist and democratic movements until the end of the 19th century, and the rule of law. As the capitalist economy with its democratizing features has developed, so has the concept of civil society. Now let us move to the next point, that is the pre-modern tradition. If the idea of civil society contains in it the idea of what relates to public, the pre-modern times may well be regarded as opposed to the concept of civil society. The Platonic rulers alone were the administrators, and a large number of those who constituted the producing class had no role to play in public affairs. The Aristotle notion of jus politikon, man as a political animal, was elastic in the sense that the political animal was a male. He alone was a citizen, and he alone was a property holder. The rest of the population, the women, the slaves, etc., constituted oikis, that is, the private world, and that could hardly be termed as constituting the civil society, as the private was not public, it was not political, and none belonging to it had any citizenship rights. The Greek society, Chandok points out, did not possess any notion of inalienable rights of men to individual freedom, which became so prominent a feature of early version of civil society. By developing the concept of rights legally ordained and especially relating to property of the individual, there did emerge the notion of civil society in ancient Rome thinking. Indeed, the notion of civil society did need such an atmosphere to shape itself, but the ancient Roman thought could hardly rise above that, notwithstanding the attempts at making distinction between the private and public, which the ancient Roman really did. During the whole medieval period in the West, when politics took the back seat, the idea of civil society got unclipped. What related to public as political was limited to a very few people called the feudal lords, barons, dukes, and counts. The idea of civil society was almost unknown. Now, the next one is the liberal individualistic tradition. The early modern period with Machiavelli and Bodin saw the emergence of politics, but the period itself did not witness the corresponding growth of the idea of civil society. The civil society as a concept rose with the idea of individuals with rights, individuals related to the state, and individuals related to others in society. There is the clear reference to civil society both in Hobbes and Locke's when the two sought to make a distinction between the state of nature and the civil society or the political society after the contract was made. Both talk about the rights bearing individuals, both sought the state to protect these rights. It is difficult to regard the contextualist Hobbes and Locke as theorists of civil society because their formulations on civil society are found in an embryonic form, and their attempts, despite a national and persuasive explanation on state and society, remained arbitrary. The concept of civil society has emerged clearly between the 17th and 19th century, especially with the classical political economic theorists such as Adam Smith. Classical political economy echoing individual rights like laissez-faire, freedom, equality made the institutions of the state as simply irrelevant, devaluing it, and that of civil society as what Marx had said, theater of history. This helped the civil society Chandok writes as a historically evolved area of individual rights and freedoms, where individuals in competition with each other pursued their respective private concern. The advent of the idea of civil society coming from the writings of the political economy theorist was to have its shape vis-a-vis the state. J.S. Mill and D. Tocqueville, who thought that the state had become much more powerful than desired, sought to limit the power of the state through the mechanism devised in the ever developing concept of civil society. Chandok sums up this phase of liberalism, saying civil society was used as a concept primarily for organizing state society relations. The expansion of the state, it was perceptibly recognized, would contribute to the shrinkage of civil arena. State power could be limited only with the expansion of the civil society. The process of democratization in the West made it possible for civil society to expand itself, and in the process restricted the area of the state. But elsewhere, the concept of the state gained prominence, restricting thus the arena of civil society. The views of Hegel and therefore of Marx and Gramsci should be of the some interest. Now let us move to the next point, that is the Hegelian, Marxian and Gramscian traditions. There is a definite relationship between the state and civil society in the writings of Hegel. He views the state as the latest link growing out of the development of various institutions. describing the state as the synthesis representing universality of the thesis of families and the antithesis of civil society. Hegel recognizes the state as higher in kind than civil society. Hegel regards the state as the highest, the latest, and even the final form of social institutions. For him, civil society, as the antithesis of the thesis of family, is an expression of the individualistic and atomistic atmosphere of a middle class commercial society in which relationships are external, governed by the unseen hands of the economic laws rather than by the self conscious will of persons. So, civil society, a negative institution as it is for Hegel, belongs to the realms of the mechanical necessity, a resultant of the irrational forces of individual desires, governed, as Sabine says for Hegel, by known moral causal laws and hence ethically anarchical. The thesis, the family, and the antithesis, the civil and the bourgeois society, merge into what Hegel calls the state, the synthesis. Thus, the state comes to have an universality of civil society and the specificity and the individuality of the family. Thus, while the political economy and the liberal democratic theorists had given primacy to civil society and had given the state a back seat, Hegel reverses the position and puts the state in the position of civil society. According to Hegel, ultimately civil society is subordinated to the state and the individual to the whole. Consequently, in Hegelian formation, Chandok says there can be no interrogation of the state, of its designs for universality, or of its rationale. The resolution of the contradiction of civil society, the state, and therefore between the people and the state, there is no dichotomy, only legitimacy and acceptance. Marx, unlike Hegel, who had made the civil society a hostage and who had idealized the state, seeks to restore the civil society to the position of making it the theater of history. But the civil society, Marx argues, has failed to live up to its promises, had failed to create a situation where the individual could find freedom and democratic transformation, had to seek ways and means through which individuals could integrate into the society and the state. Gramsci, following Marx and developing his theory of state, takes into account the reality of civil society. His main proposition is that one cannot understand the state without understanding the civil society. He says that the state should be understood as not only the apparatus of government but also the private apparatus of hegemony or civil society. Building on the Marxian notion of state, Gramsci makes a distinction between the state as a political organization, the integral state, the visible political constitution of civil society, and the state as government. The integral state keeps reproducing itself in the practices of everyday life through activities situated in the civil society. It is hegemony which provides moral and intellectual leadership to practices in civil society. Hegemony for Gramsci works for both for the dominant as well as the subaltern class in civil society. Each class must, Gramsci says, before seizing power, hegemonize social relations in society. To sum up, it may be said that for both the liberal and the Marxist, civil society is primary, while the liberals argue for the separation of civil society from the autonomy of the state. The Marxists, on the other hand, create an alternative tradition of civil society in which the civil society, with its all potentialities, has to keep itself always reorganized and transformed. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.